Surprise! Fun fact that 98% of people who watch these videos aren't subscribed. So please support the channel and hit the subscribe button below. You won't regret it. Cheers guys and enjoy the episode. Alright, so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to tap the stud with a hammer. I'm holding the rod and I'm also trying not to let that piston move around, but a couple of good taps and the stud's out. So just like that, both those studs are out. I got brand new studs as well as brand new nuts, so I should be all sweet. So all we're gonna do here is you're gonna guide the stud in by hand. Make sure the flat is in line with the flat of the rod. And then we're gonna put it in the vise. And I've got a 9mm socket to sit over here. You want to make sure the vise doesn't contact the side of the rod as well. So that socket just bottomed out on the stud. So I'm just going to use a bigger socket now. And just like that, the new stud is in. So I'm just going to repeat that with all the rest, and then we're good to go.
All of the pain seems to follow, like a shadow dark and cold to the touch. Am I insane not to let go? Do what you do, and it hurts as I bleed.
So with the rod bolts now replaced on the rods, I just thought I'd do a quick measurement on those, and the brand new rod bolts that I just chucked in are 60.4mm. Now if I measure these ones, they come in at 61.4, which means they're definitely past their torque to yield. So yeah, if you reuse them, you run the risk of breaking them, that's the thing. So the likelihood of it happening is probably pretty slim, but it's a possibility, and that's a possibility that I'm not willing to take. Obviously, you know, you do you. But as you can see, these bolts are now 1mm longer because they've been stretched when they've been done up. That's just how they're supposed to be. So replace the rod bolts, do yourself a favor, they're cheap enough, they're 120 bucks or something I think I paid for rod bolts and nuts. The nuts are probably fine, you probably get away with them, but I did both rod bolts and nuts just as a set, just peace of mind, so I know I won't have any issues regarding that. So you've just seen me do the rod bolts, so now I'm going to clean the pistons up one final time, make sure they are sparkly clean, remove all the carbon off the top, and then I'm going to install the rest of the piston rings. Going to make sure they're all lined up properly. I'll take you through that when it comes to it. And then I'm also going to install the pistons in the block, and that will be our assembled short block. Once the pistons are in, I can remove those main bolts once more, fit the girdle, and then put it all back together. So stay with us and we'll get to that now. Got my eye protection on. It's a must-have, especially with these wire wheels. That's the difference.
A breeze, a river flowing deep, don't wanna leave the air you breathe, living me dreams when I think of you and me, don't wanna leave the world you see, and I will hold you down if love is still
Alright folks, it's time. I'm about to put the pistons in the block for the last time to assemble the short motor. This is how you want your rings to be set round. So for your oil control rings, you want one gap here, the gap for the spacer in the center, and the other gap here. These two can be flipped around whichever way, but you must have them all offset from each other. In the instructions from Hastings, it recommends about 1 inch between each one. And as far as that, you want your oil separated gaps here, or for your oil rings, and then your top compression and second compression ring you want as like a Y pattern, so they're all evenly spaced apart. I'm just going to assemble the piston rings, put them on the pistons. I've cleaned the pistons up, so now they're actually clean, and we're going to flip this block round and whack them all in. So then the short block will be assembled. Okay, to start the piston install process, I'm going to get a clean tack rag and wipe down the pistons and the bores so there's no dirt or dust on them. I'm then going to apply some assembly lube to the conrod bearings and crank, and oil up the bore and ring compressor tool with some engine oil. Then I'm going to align the rings as I showed you earlier and place into the compressor tool. Insert the bottom half of the piston into the bore, making sure the mark on the piston is facing forwards, and gently tap it into the bore. If the piston stops, a ring may have slipped out. If this happens, which it can, then remove the assembly and check for any damage before trying again. It helps to use one hand to push the compressor tool onto the block when tapping the piston assembly down. Some of these rings, you've also got to check to make sure if the ring has a top or bottom mark. Usually they have a dot or top written on them, and if they do, that means that side has to face up. So these second rings, these second compression rings, they're a cast iron, I'm pretty sure, they have a dot on them, so that dot has to face upwards. So you just want to make sure when you put your piston ring compressor on that none of the rings have jumped out, because if they do, you can crush them or bend them, and you don't want to do that. They're not done up to torque yet, and I'm going to make note of that so I don't forget it. I'm going to put the rest of the pistons in, and then this block is ready to go. I'm going to go find the front crank bolt and put that in so I can turn the crank over to line it up as I'm doing it. Also, I just thought I'd mention, I forgot to record earlier, when measuring your ring gaps, your end clearance or your end gaps, you also need to measure the ring clearance in the piston itself, so from the ringland. So to do that, you use a feeler gauge and you actually measure between the ring and that tiny little gap between the ring and the piston, and it should be between like 0.02 and 0.08 mil or something like that. So if you can't put a 0.08 mil in, you're doing well, and as long as you can get anything between that and a 0.02 in, you should be sweet. Now I should have filmed this before, but I thought I'd ask the question to anybody watching this. So these pistons are smooth right here. However, piston 1 to 4 all had cross hatching as part of the casting here. So if anybody knows why I've got 2 odd pistons, maybe it was rebuilt a long time ago as like a warranty recall or something, I'm not sure. But if anybody knows why these are smooth and the others all had cross hatching there, I'd love to know why. So if you do, or you have like a theory, drop it down in the comments below and let me know. Right guys, so my filming's been all over the place and I apologise for that. I'm just trying to do 400 things at once here. But for now, I'm going to measure the end float on the crankshaft. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my screwdriver in here, give it a little wiggle, make sure that that's in the right spot. Now the tolerance is between 0.1 and 0.2 mil, and the service limit is 0.3 mil. So I've got my 0.1 and 0.2 mil feeler gauges here. So the 0.1 mil you want to go in there. So even though this one's slightly broken, it slides in there nicely. There's a little bit of resistance there, so that's good. And the 0.2 mil doesn't fit. So that's a good fit. So if you want to check the other side, you simply just push your crankshaft the opposite way. So just make sure you don't lever off the actual bearing surface itself, because that's where it goes bad. So you want to swap the other side. You don't have to measure both sides, but it's good practice if you must. So the 0.1 goes in there fine, a little bit of resistance, and 0.2 is a no-go. So that crank end float is within spec and it's good. Alright, so we're up to our piston conrod side play now. So we're just going to measure that. The tolerance is 0.09 mil to 0.29 mil. I have 0.08 to 0.28 on my feeler gauges here. So what you're going to do is pull the conrod to one side, make sure the small feeler gauge goes in, and then the big one should not, and that means that that's in spec. So they're all within spec. Alright, so as you guys would have just seen, I went round and I took each nut off individually and put some assembly lube on the bottom of it. So now I'm going to brace the engine stand because it's going to want to try and move. And I'm going to torque all of these up to 25 Newton meters in one pass. Then I'm going to go through with another pass and change and then re-torque to 90 degrees. So these are 25 Newton meters plus 90 degrees, and they are torque to yield, so they are single use only. So I'm happy with how the pistons and rings and everything else is sitting. I'm happy with all the bearing clearances and the side clearances. So now the final step is doing these rod bolts up to spec. Then I can put the girdle on the main caps, and then we can do the main caps up to torque spec for the final time. Okay, so I've just done the pass of 25 Newton meters, so now I'm going to crank each one a further 90 degrees. So it's best to use a dial indicator gauge here. I don't have one. You can actually feel the bolts stretch, but all I'm doing is making a mental note of where the breaker bar starts and where I'm finishing it. So I had to pause the recording because I actually forgot where I was because I was too busy talking. So I'm just going to do the rest without any more explanation. Alright, so that is all the rod bolts torqued up to spec. Now I can rip all these main cap bolts out again, put the girdle on there, put the main cap bolts back in and torque them back to spec. Also, don't forget to put some assembly lube on the thread of the bolts, not a whole lot though, and just a little bit on the surface where the bolts meet, which will be on the girdle now. Alright, so I've gone to a B series girdle. Now this is purely for the fact of where the dipstick hole is. You can modify the FG one to suit, but I thought I may as well just use the B series one. I've got it here. So yeah, all I'm going to do now is chuck some assembly lube on each bolt, and then we're going to drop them back in and torque them back up to spec.
What does perfect even mean? Is there even such a thing? Ooh, can we switch up all the rules and imagine a utopia? Darling, I'm just so fed up with these expectations. They keep weighing me down. My heart is begging me to get the...
So I've just noticed this main bolt out of the donor motor is actually bent. So I'm just going to replace it with one of the ones that came out of the FG, but it still has a stud on the bottom.
Honey, I'm a perfect 10. Whoa, whoa. Honey, I'm a perfect 10. Whoa, whoa. And if I say it enough, it gets ingrained in my head, and I start.
So these main caps are torqued to 85 Newton meters. You want to work from the inside to the outside of the motor, and you also want to use a star pattern.
Perfect 10. Whoa. Honey, I'm a perfect 10. Honey, I'm a, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've discussed it.
So you might have noticed I'm actually letting go of the torque wrench while I'm double checking these, and that's just to make sure I have a correct reading and my hand isn't giving any false reading by putting any extra load on the bolt. Alright guys, so that is the short motor buttoned up. It's all torqued to spec, everything's ready to go. All I need to do is remove and refit the pickup when I put the oil pump on, but that's another day, as well as the sump obviously. So I'm going to leave this episode here for now because I didn't realise the first one dragged on so long, so I'm going to try and keep this short. So thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also a massive thank you again to Dominator Motorsports, to Woody at High Flow Engineering, to Matt at Dark Horse Performance. You guys have all been amazing and you're helping along with this build quite nicely. Woody, you did awesome machine work, mate, so can't thank you enough. Matt, answering all my questions, stopping me having panic attacks over small things that aren't really an issue. So yeah, thank you very much for all the info. Thank you very much for all the help and support, guys. Dominator for hooking us up with some parts. You guys are all legends, and we'll see you all in the next video. Don't forget to share it with your mates, and we'll see you then. Cheers, guys.